white, male, heteronormative, able-bodied conditions. Historically, that has been systemically and structurally privileged to be straight, male, white, Christian. So, what we want to do is open up the conversation. Now, Elizabeth has already told me about some lights that went on inside her, and I'm going to hand the mic over to her in just a second. And Horace and I have talked many times. We had an amazing tour of Morehouse. By the way, I was thinking of you yesterday. Did you see the thing about the Morehouse professor who held the baby in his arms during the class? So I have to tell you this. Now, y'all watch this. Just watch the pride wash over Horace, who came from the house. This is what he calls Morehouse. Just watch it now. So on national news yesterday, they had a clip about a professor at the house who had a student, a male student, who had brought his own baby in arms, and the professor said, "You let me hold that baby while I'm doing the lectures so you can take notes better." And that professor, for an hour at the house, was holding this baby and lecturing. And the baby was, so that's not the topic for the day, but I just, wonderful. Anyway, we had a tour of Morehouse, and he was telling me about a lot of the struggles of institutional homophobia there. So this preference, this privilege stuff is in our air. We swim in it, and it's so much better to be aware of it. Now, so I'm just going to say a word, then I'm going to shift to Elizabeth for her to tell her story, anything that Horace wants to say, and then we're going to open it up very, very quickly because I want the conversation to go. I've always been, as a product of South Georgia, and a person who had a mystical experience when he was 6, knowing that absolutely everyone is God's favorite, that was inconsistent with being fed that I had, as a straight white male, more worth than anybody else. Now that's the definition of supremacy. Because I was a Christian, a straight white male, I had literally more ontological, being-oriented worth than anybody else. Consequently, it was okay to discriminate and to segregate. So I was on a journey all my life of wrestling with that tension and knowing that that privilege was assigned to me and it was not who I was, and that everybody is equal and everybody is God's favorite and everybody is the most beautiful and the most loved. And then when the massacre took place in Charleston, I was still in the pulpit in a place that I used to work in. I've forgotten its name. And I had to come to terms with the fact that that kid went in there and participated in Wednesday night Bible study. I've been to a million Wednesday night Bible studies. With his own Bible, taken out of a knapsack that had a Confederate flag decal on it. And I went to town on what is Confederate consciousness. And I did a lot of work and preached a very important sermon to me. I don't know about anybody else, but I preached to myself, which are the best sermons anyway, when you preach to yourself. And I unpacked the Confederate consciousness that exists in the world and in me. And then I had to start coming to terms with asking God to work with me to heal me of that. So I really know what we were talking about, and I know it's my responsibility, and I'm on a journey, and I'm on a journey with you about this. So Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm trying to figure out where to start. So I grew up in white suburbia in Durham, North Carolina, and it is a very racially segregated city. So that was my experience growing up. After college, I chose to serve in the Episcopal Urban Intern Program out in Los Angeles. You all have heard me preach about this before. And it was with a great deal of intention that I went out there to really begin my own personal discernment about whether or not I was called to the priesthood. And I was living in Inglewood, California, right in South Central Los Angeles, and working in South Central at a school for kids who needed extra support for severely emotionally disturbed children. And that whole year of living out there, I went out and realized the amount of white privilege I was, privileged to have, to even be able to make the choice to go live in Inglewood, that was a choice. And that whole year, I had the experience of day in and day out, each hour, each minute of every day, being very, very, very aware of the color of my skin. Very, very, very. That is something that we as white people do not have to face. But I stood out, blonde hair, blue eyes, and we are very fair skinned. And it was a constant awareness and awakening for me, and a constant kind of conversation with everyone that I was interacting with. And over the course of that year, because I had been resistant to the call to priesthood, over the course of that year, by the end, I recognized my call, and I heard it reflected for the first time since I gave voice to that call in the words that Catherine spoke to us last week. And my call at the end of that year was to use my privilege and use my voice to give voice to those who do not have the power and whose voices do not come with it the privilege. And that, for me, it was an echo and a challenge again to continue to grow in my own understanding of what it is to be a white woman in today's society, and how I have privilege and voice to be able to shift some of what is going on in our world today.
Thanks.
Amen.
As a way of transitioning to Horace, you're having the microphone. I wanted to just note related to that. One of the things that Dr. Meeks said last week that was very powerful to me was that people like her who get a PhD from Emory and then who have a really great, powerful job and who have influence and have to guard against becoming an instrument of the system and not still being an advocate and in solidarity with people who are still disadvantaged and prejudiced against and. So just wanted to note that. No,
Thank you.
whatever you were going to
Yes. So thank you, Ed and Elizabeth. So I come on the other side of that as having been victimized by racism, as you can see. Probably growing up in the South, it wouldn't be a surprise, and a person of my age, or I shouldn't have to put age there because we still see is very much alive and well, unfortunately, in our culture today. And as I preached last month, that a lot of things we thought we had overcome on race are still with us. I grew up in Stark, Florida, 40 miles west of Jacksonville, and grew up in a Jim Crow segregated South, and I'm 57. So that's how close segregation is to us. I remember very vividly my mother taking me to the back door of the dentist office as a kid, 5 years old, and sitting in the colored waiting room in the doctor's office. And I remember one time, as kids do, I was playing out of the waiting room and saw this beautiful, this was a darkened, smaller room for us colored folks. And then this very sterling, open air and light for whites and stark. So, you know, kids are attracted to that. And so I was playing and moving toward that, and my mother called me back because it was the parents' job to make sure their children obeyed segregation. So I remember those two experiences. And then going into high school, being with my band classmates, and I thought they were my close friends, and I was told later by one of the friends that one of the young women said, Horace is almost good enough to be white. So I hold those experiences together with the experience that when I graduated in 1979 from that same high school, the senior class voted me as the most likely to succeed of this predominantly white working class who had swum in the waters that Ed mentioned. So that gives me hope, and I need to hold those together to get up every day, to come here, to do the work I do, to preach what I preach, to write what I write, to speak what I speak, to believe that there is redemption, as I wrote in The Shepherd's Voice, as we look at this ugly history and what's still with us, that we hold that to know that people can be healed and transformed. That's what we preach, and that's what we practice.
Thank you. So before we open it to the questions, and what I'm going to ask to do is 2 volunteers to be our mic people today. So anybody who wants to be thinking about whether the Lord is calling them into this ministry.
Mic ministry.
Mic ministry, thank you very much. So now I've forgotten the point I was going to make, but that's all right, it'll come back to me. So let's see, what kind of questions? Who has a question, a comment, a challenge, anything? Steve, thank you. Yeah, and everybody hold it like a ice cream cone right up against your lips. No.
Is it on?
Okay. Well, I don't need it. That's true. That's true. The person in Japan needs to hear you, but you go ahead and let's.
I grew up in West Virginia.
Want this one? Oh, no. Okay.
Speak into it. Make sure.
Tap the other one.
Or speak into
Hello.
it.
Thank you. This is what we need of somebody.
Go ahead and try.
Try it. Try both of them.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes.
Use it, Stephen. Use it, please, sir.
I grew up in West Virginia, southern West Virginia, coal fields. You may not know this, but West Virginia is 96% white.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I know that is at one time in my life, I was director of personnel for West Virginia. And so I know all the statistics. I refuse to accept discrimination.
Good. Yay.
I just refuse to do so. Those of you who read my book know that I say that in my book. I went to Vietnam. I wear a Purple Heart. I fought for this country, and you are not going to discriminate against me. I must have been to 50 of these discussions. And I'm going to tell you, I don't feel bad for being a person of color. I say, my dad was a Baptist minister. And he used to say, the key to salvation is to stop doing what you're doing that's wrong and start doing what's right. And so that's all I want from you. Just treat me with decency and respect.
Yes.
I don't want your white privilege. Privilege is mine. There's no discrimination in privilege unless you make it that way. So, Steve Stevens will not accept it for Steve Stevens, for Olivia, or any of my children. Thank you.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much. While the mic's coming to you, I did remember what I wanted to say. One of the things that Dr. Meeks said was white folks can do their work and they don't have to have African American or other people of color around to do it for them. In fact, that's not the job of somebody else. It's the job of white folks. And then she said, and you don't have to be around in a diverse community. I just want to add, it really helps because it is so important. I have so many visions about the brand I want St. Luke's to have. And I want one of the brands, I talked about one of them in the sermon. One of the brands I want is that people say, you know, they really do know how to talk about difference in that place, and they don't have their heads in the sand about it. In fact, they actually celebrate it. And in order to do that, white people in particular need to have an understanding of the difference between intent and impact. And I can have the best intentions in the world, but because I swim in the waters of privilege, I don't know how some things I say impact somebody who doesn't swim in the waters of so what we three have already had a pact about is that with candor and courage, we are going to say to one another, can I just tell you, are you in a place to hear how that impacted me? And that's the beautiful thing about our having a growingly diverse faith community here at St. Luke's, which we are going to, I'm the sherbet that is the palate cleanser between a great course and the next course, and during my time of y'all eating the sherbet, I'm just going to see how diverse we can be here in this place. Please.
I wanted to take this opportunity. Last weekend, I saw a play at the Alliance called Goodnight Tyler, which I would heartily recommend to you. It was really a nuanced look at privilege and racism, and really, really powerful. And it's still playing. It's next weekend. I think it's this last weekend. But the thing that I came away from in that is that no matter how woke I think I'm going to get, that I am never going to be able to understand what it's like to be a person of color in this country. I can work to appreciate it, but the idea that I'm going to read some books and come to some discussions and then be able to apprehend that experience, I'm not going to be able to. And that may sound like, I don't know. For me, that felt important. I mean, it's still good to do the work, but just that it's such an immense thing to be a person of color in this country, and that it's a unique thing that I can work on being knowledgeable about, but I'm not ever going to be able to totally empathize with that.
Thank you.
So, as I might not be able to understand what it's like to be a person of color, my challenge is to understand what it's to be a white man in our culture. And so I've been part of the Bridge Builders group here at St. Luke's, and encountering and understanding some of what it's like to be a person of color. But now I'm in a neighborhood, mostly white, study book club, reading books about white privilege, like what does it mean to be white in our culture? And I'm learning how much I don't know about my own privilege and what it's like to be a majority in this country.
Let me just underscore these two ideas. And it is a wonderful thing to have a book group and read some really great books in the intimacy of a book group, of 8 people, something like that. And what you just mentioned is a great book. White Like Me is another great book. White Fragility is another great book. And we'll get all of these books out on a list. And you're absolutely authorized by the Holy Ghost right this second to get up any kind of small group you want in your living room and say, will you come and spend a month or 6 weeks reading this book with me? Next question, please, go ahead.
I would like to add to that. Yes, you're white and you will not experience life as Stephen and I will, or Melba, and I do. But you can find those places. Relationships are very powerful. If there are people at your job who you can connect with, in your neighborhood, if you find books to read. So finding as much knowledge, museums. We're in Atlanta, so there's really a wealth of African Americans and other Latinos, others who are share a different experience, and hearing and finding out what life is like. Talking about privilege, the things that we encounter, not because we are seeking it. I don't, like Stephen, I refuse to be discriminated against. And I don't go out looking for it, and I just can say, I'm just a human being in this world. It's when I walk out this door, the world sees me as a black man and responds to me as a black man. So that is a constant reminder that I'm not seen as a white man in the society. So I think ways that you can find to educate yourself will bring about awareness of privilege and then work to make a difference.
Thanks for saying that. Yes, Tina.
Hi. I find it difficult to feel like we have to study a book or go to a book group or go get a degree in love and in acceptance. And I mean, to me, you cannot learn, this is my opinion, you cannot learn empathy. You cannot learn acceptance. I don't know if any of y'all have ever gone and studied a book on gay people, so therefore you're going to come up to me and say, oh, I understand you because you're gay. You're either going to know me and love me as a human being, or I'm going to know him and love him as a human being, and I'm not going to think that, or either I'm not going to look at you and love you because you're a white man. Well, that would be a real stretch for me. But anyway, sorry. Anyway, I'm just saying, to me, it is about when we can get to a place in this country and in this world of not putting each other in boxes and seeing each other through the eyes that I believe that Christ would have us to see each other as, then there's not a lot of homework to do. And if there's homework to do, then that's on us. But I think we're in an amazing place here. I was with Ed for 20 years in Pasadena, and so I just feel like being here and Ed coming here to Atlanta is like a huge gift. But I think that here is a beautiful place for love and for transformation, but it doesn't have to be complicated.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Hello,
Hi.
I'm Mary Kyle. I grew up in the Northeast, and I'm middle-aged. So my experience as a child, as I'm sitting here thinking about it, was that there were no blacks in my neighborhood. All the people I knew who were black lived in the city. They lived in Newark, they lived in New York. So my experience of living with people who didn't look like me did not exist. Everybody looked like me, and everybody in all the places I went looked like me. When I went to college, that changed. Now I was living outside of New York City, going to college, in hallways with people who didn't look like me. But I still felt like it was very secluded in terms of our insular, I guess would be a good word. The Black Student Union was here, other kids were here, Asian kids were here, and there wasn't a lot of crossover. I think that's, of course, changed with the way our kids live into each other's lives now, which is wonderful. My experience with good friends reflect what this woman ahead of me was saying, that you don't really get to know anyone until you love them, until you spend time with them over and over and over, and their challenges and your challenges and how your lives can weave together. when I go to dinner with friends of mine who are African American, I'm not. They have said to me, "You don't really see my color," and I said, "No, I don't. I don't see that. I see who they are. I see what their challenges are." But I also didn't grow up in an environment that the South has had to live with and through. I mean, I don't remember the kind of violence. Well, I don't know that there were lynchings around me in the Northeast. That wasn't part of the land and the culture that I grew up in. There were certainly wars between different nationalities. I mean, the Italians in the city didn't like the Polish in the city, who didn't like the Irish in the city. They might shoot each other, but there was no sense of lynching and a whole culture of people who were different, and this happened to them and it didn't happen to us. But I agree with the woman who spoke before. It's about it is educational. I mean, I don't think you shouldn't read books and be in book clubs, but it's about opening your heart and getting to know people. That takes a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. CJ, I'm going to take advantage of, oops, help me. Oops, I got it. That slid. I just want to see if this is going to sound better in this room.
Okay.
Just run a test.
Okay.
All right?
Hold it.
That's fine.
How am I doing? Can you hear me? Okay. All right.
I'll stand with you.
All right. So I appreciate the message of love. I think it's vital and imperative that we speak to each other in that language and are accepting of one another's differences. What I will say is also true, is that love alone does not necessarily negate the disparities in, I think of several categories: wealth, health, education, and criminal justice. Right? Those are to me, those are the big buckets and disparities in this country right now. Right? And they are legacies of action and inaction by our collective body and our legislators. Right? And love alone is not going to change those things. Inviting somebody over to dinner alone is not going to change those things. I can't tell you the specifics of what will negate the distribution of the GI Bill, what will negate what redlining has done in our past, what will negate the health disparities in our country. But I'm just going to push us to say love is important. There are other things, there's an and to that also.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So.
Amen.
Thank you for saying that, because I think it is love and skills, love-based skills, and policy changes, and all three of that. So love has to be embodied. It's got to be made tangible. You know, Jane, let's keep doing that. We're going to get to A+ on this sound business. I'm telling you right now, if this sounds better in this room, I'll take this right
Jim
here.
knows mine.
Because I can stand next to you.
But on the,
Yeah,
it's great on the
that
tape,
earpiece.
but not in this room, so keep doing
Okay.
that. Hey, honey, you got it.
Well, darling, you knew I didn't know what I was doing.
Community together.
That's right. All right, now all right, you can hear me. Okay, I believe that what white privileges can do is to use their power as white privilege.
Mm-hmm.
These people need to hear that.
I'm sorry.
Your testimony too.
Okay. And I think the best thing that we can do is to do everything we can to make sure the right to vote is everywhere and that everybody votes, because I believe a lot of the life is in the ballot box.
And maybe we can get something done if the right people are there. It's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Not everybody has to preach. You can challenge.
While we're waiting, I just would like to commend to all of us as Episcopalians, our diocese and our national church has required, certainly of our leaders, to take the anti-racism training, and I commend that to you, because many times I found my white sisters and brothers, they are actually doing racist things, but they don't know they're racist. And I think anti-racism training brings you into the many ways that racism exists. It's not just going out being a Klan member or using the N-word. Racism is much, there are degrees of racism. So becoming informed about ways that you carry racism and do racist things, I think is important. And that's a great tool to get in touch and then begin the work that CJ is saying, ways that you can undo and be healed, as Catherine raises.
So we only have 5 minutes, and I want to ask the two of you if you're willing to, let's complicate this a little bit more. I am drawn to the word intersectionality because there's not just one oppression. There are interlocking oppressions.
Yes.
And they're not competing oppressions, but it's all of a piece. And I just wanted to know if you wanted to say anything beyond your whiteness, and if you wanted to say anything beyond your skin. And let's see if you, just as a closeout, want to say anything about that.
Yes. I shared a little bit in my sermon I preached a little bit a while back about my feeling very much self-righteous about being Baptist. And that was, so I had some of that religious bigotry going on. But I also, two big ones at Morehouse was my own internalized homophobia and my sexism. And I share when I taught my students about I was so sexist and had to work on my sexism as a man with privilege that when I was at Morehouse, all-male institution, there were women from Spelman who came over. You haven't heard this story. And so I was chair of the communion committee. Bad mistake, giving me power. Because as the chair, I followed what I had been taught and trained in my very sexist Black Baptist church. Women could prepare the communion, but they could not serve. So when the Spelman women came and joined the communion committee, there were all men on one side the night we served communion, the first women from Spelman. And so the dean of the chapel passed down the trays of bread and wine. And instead of passing it all the way down, guess what I did? I held it. First of all, symmetrically, it looks awful. and then I went in front of them to serve. And the other thing that stood out for me, I mean, it's bad, and it was great when my students had a hard time believing that I did that. So doing the work to overcome that. The other was a woman from Clark College who was on the ordination track, United Methodist, who ordain women, Baptists typically don't. When she came onto the chapel assistance board, I was really not happy. And I remember one time when she preached the 7 last words during the Good Friday service. From the time she got up until she sat down, I held my head down and would not look at her. And I share that with you to say how we all, I don't care who you are, you can be taught, because that's what it is, being indoctrinated into oppression, to have an oppressive attitude, and to feel superior. Is what she talked about, wanting to be over someone. And so I've had to do work in my own way to overcome my sexist upbringing and my homophobia. So I wrote a book on that to try to do penance.
You want to wrap it up?
Sure. So my response is kind of similar to Horace's, but it's from the side of being a woman in the church, in the Episcopal Church. And I'm going to talk about current day. So I've served at a parish in New York. I served at All Saints for 8 years, and I've been here for 4 years. My white male counterparts have been hired as rectors after 2 years. Our image of a rector that we carry around subconsciously or consciously is this man sitting here in the middle. It's true. And the diocese has been challenged over the last, I want to say, 5 or 6 years. The bishop specifically was challenged because he was saying, associates, you need to move on because we need to bring other associates in. And the female associate said, hold on. There are no open positions, and you are not supporting us to become rectors. And you know what the response was? For the next 3 years, there was a report that said no change in hiring more female rectors in the diocese. And that's all that was addressed about it. So we have work to do. I think female priests feel very welcomed and supported and feel like their ministry is appreciated. However, there's a limit. There's what we call the stained glass ceiling. And I think we have some real work to do around that.
Amen.
So I'm so grateful that we're here in this parish that has this kind of conversation with these two colleagues. And none of us is going to snap our finger and have it over simply because of our great intentions. But we can make a difference. Transformation is hugely important. And we can transform ourselves in community and then go out into the world and transform that community to be much more inclusive, radically, radically inclusive. So thank you for being here. We're going to get out of the way so we can worship at 11:15. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good.
That was good.
Yeah. Good job.